Chapter 1. A sign hung on the frosted glass door. Matthew J. Singletary, Director of Enterprise Systems Analysis. That's me. Matt to my friends. I'm almost 6 feet tall, thickly built, blue-eyed, confident, and also a fairly well-respected businessman. In my 29 years, I was, to my knowledge, the only holder of such a title in the entire business world. When asked what the title really meant, I shrugged. No one had ever explained it to me either. What was clear was my role in the corporate structure. My function? Well, if the business world is a Louis L'Amour Western, then I'm a handy cowboy who's come to the territory to clean it up and make it a great place for pretty schoolgirls and lady ranchers. My boss, the owner of the self-named Reese Donaldson Enterprises, used me like a hired gun, sending me to various businesses with carte blanche to analyze the operations of each one from top to bottom. I had the authority to change a lot of things on the spot. If it was more appropriate, for example, if I recommended firing a top manager for cause, I sent Mr. Donaldson my recommendations. He almost never rejected my suggestions, and when he did, he sat me down and explained all the cause and effect. I wasn't sure if I was technically at the top of the management team or the lowest rung of the executive team, but it didn't matter. The only person who had any control over me was the big boss. More than one instance of intra-organizational scuffles had been resolved with a quick call to the boss's personal number. I had it on my contact list, and many of his senior staff did not. I had certain God-given talents that allowed me to spot inefficiencies, identify bottlenecks, and root out corruption that was costing Mr. Donaldson money. I used those skills on a daily basis to benefit Mr. Donaldson. I was good at what I did, very good, and I was known as someone you didn't want to do business with because I could recognize fraud and double dealing in a flash. At least I was able to do that in my professional life, but unfortunately, not so often in my personal life. It was the day after Independence Day, and I was busily packing everything I needed into my briefcase. It was only 10:30 Friday morning, but we had all gotten an early start to the weekend because Old Man had just announced that he was closing the office and letting everyone go home. The boss said that most of the businesses we depended on for material support, and most downtown businesses in general, were already closed. He reasoned that none of his employees would be able to do anything, so it wasn't worth keeping the lights on. Seemed like a good idea to me. Fastening the strap on the side of my briefcase, I closed my office door and patted the sign on the door with mocking gentleness. Since people were watching me, I pretended to use the cuff of my right sleeve to wipe off a stain that wasn't there. When I saw the crowd moving toward the elevators from the end of the hallway, I snapped out of my seat and rushed that way, as if in a panic run to be the first to get there. Laughs were heard, and some of the guys and girls started running as hard as they could to overtake me. It was all a lot of fun. Donaldson's was a family business, and we in the headquarters building got along very well with each other. I was home by 11:10, and I'm sure my eyes were glistening with excitement as I unwrapped my new toy, a Shaba drone. It was perhaps one of the most superbly equipped drones with the longest range in the world of drones, both military and non-military. After reading the user manual, I learned that Shaba means ghost in Arabic. That's what they called the F-117 stealth fighters during the Gulf Wars. This drone model was named Shaba because, according to the manual, it was one of the quietest and stealthiest drones on the market. My wonderful wife, Faye, had somehow acquired this jewel on one of those bidding sites for a mere penny, beating someone else by exactly 1 cent, just a split second before the auction closed. And now it was mine, given to me for my birthday last Sunday. I had been working on it all week, in the evenings after work, getting the ugly little monster ready to fly, so all I had to do was check it over one last time and wipe my fingerprints off on one of the rotor blades. He was ready for his first flight. All I was missing was Faye, my favorite wife of 3 years, to watch him. In the morning, Faye told me she would be on the road showing properties to various clients, but shouldn't be home late by evening. I wished she had arrived earlier, immediately. I wasn't in the habit of bothering her at work, But this time I tried to call her company-provided smartphone to see if she could take time off and be home in time for the first flight. It was just after noon, and Faye was probably still eating lunch, but the call went straight to voicemail. It was the same with my next two attempts. I didn't know why this happened, as Faye was a very junior real estate agent in an agency run by an affable 64-year-old man named Martin Rutherford. The main office was in the southwest part of the city, but I knew Faye wasn't in it. First, I called the landline. I was a little annoyed because I knew that Mr. Rutherford adhered to the company policy that Rutherford's employees should always be accessible through company-provided equipment. Well, maybe she was in a part of town that doesn't have a good cell signal. It happens. Giving up, I decided not to wait for my wife. She probably wouldn't be thrilled to see the Shaba fly for the first time anyway. She probably won't even be interested. Flying toys aren't her thing. I rolled it out onto the driveway in front of our two-car garage, started the miniature motors, and tested all the various functions. I gave it a test flight, flying it for a few minutes in a short, lazy 8 pattern between our house and the other side of the street, getting used to the controls and adjusting to the cockpit view on the bulky remote control. I was very impressed with the 1080p video footage from the bottom-mounted camera. I planted the miniature machine in the driveway. While the rotors were idling, I took the remote control into the house, away from the sunlight. I transferred the image to the large monitor I usually hooked up to my laptop at home. I liked the laptop's larger screen, and it worked fine with the Shaba remote. Soon I was taking off again, without getting up from my desk in our office. Taking the machine out over the center of the street, I pointed it to the right, to the east, and added power to get it to an altitude of 40 feet. I figured that would be enough to get around all the poles and houses in the immediate vicinity, even if I somehow deviated from the center line of the road. After a few minutes of contemplating the world through the drone's cameras, I calmed down. I was enthralled. It was like the good old days. I loved flying. I always had. My Uncle Jake had taught me to fly years ago when I was just a teenager. At 15, I took a solo flight in a single-engine airplane. 2 years later, I got my multi-engine airplane certificate, so I could fly Uncle Jake's twin-engine Cessnas. At the time, those were the happiest years of my young life. In those days, renting even the smallest airplanes was prohibitively expensive. Times were hard for Faye and I just couldn't afford to indulge myself. This little drone was the closest thing to actual flying, and I loved it. I flew a few blocks without noticing the eye in the sky above my head. It was very, very quiet, and not big enough to be a visual disturbance. Most people focus their attention on things that are at or below eye level anyway. They wouldn't have seen me. I, on the other hand, did see them. There were kids playing in yards, people washing cars, a golden retriever swimming in one of the backyards, and clearly not enjoying it in the slightest. Everyone was doing what people do every day on a warm summer day. I stopped the drone's forward motion not far from a beautiful brick house standing at a street intersection and took the opportunity to practice hovering, increasing and decreasing altitude. I didn't want to keep heading east, because if I did, I would fly over or very near the home of one Miss Kelly Sanderson. This woman appeared to be the same age as Faye and me, although some claimed she had celebrated her 30th birthday in February each of the last 4 years. And in fact, well, who knows? What we did know was that she had gone through her 3rd divorce not too long ago and was on the lookout for hubby number 4, or maybe just a short-term relationship, depending on which opportunity came her way first. Kelly was a flirt, and by reputation, was sure to keep her flirtatious promises. That's what everyone said. Her sister, visiting her last summer, had remarked that Kelly would gladly screw a post to the fence if it promised her dinner and a couple drinks. Everyone around her when she made that remark was a woman. I was the only male who heard it through the open kitchen window, and, as they say, hurriedly left that vantage point. I just didn't want to know anymore. Unfortunately, I did know one thing. Kelly didn't seem to care whether the object of her flirtation was a married or unmarried man. Kelly Sanderson was making me nervous. I turned around a shallow left turn and headed back west, past my house, accelerating to a pretty good speed. No one seemed to notice the flyer, even though there was an increased noise level with the high-speed traffic. I led the Shaba west through a series of cross streets until I got to the western edge of the apartment complex and reduced my speed to the slowest and quietest. All the houses in our neighborhood were more or less the same. Each had much of the same architecture: spacious lots, two-car garages, and large lots. The neighborhood on the west side was called George Orwell's neighborhood because those houses were a little more equal than all the others in the neighborhood. They were a little better laid out. They had garages for 3 or 4 cars instead of 2, and they each had a nice pool in the backyard. Shabak reached the cul-de-sac where the best houses of Orwellian suburbia stood. There was only undeveloped greenery farther on, and I wanted to bring the drone home to check the whole system, see how long it would take to recharge after such a long flight, and do a million other things. I started maneuvering to change course and bring the Shaba home. As the ship veered to the left and then took an eastward course, I caught a brief flash of color to my right, in front of the garage of Taylor Hennings's beautiful home. I hesitated. I felt my face shrink into a frown. I turned back toward the barely glimpsed color because it looked a lot like the Matador red of my wife's Lexus, which we'd bought a few months ago because Faye needed a car with status to drive potential buyers around to look at houses. I couldn't think of a single reason for my wife's car to be in that part of the apartment complex. None at all. Much less at the Henning house. But it was parked there. I was sure it was my wife's car before I was even close enough to see the details. A moment later, I was close enough to make out the license plate, turning the HD camera belly first and zooming in on the optics from 20 yards or so away. It was definitely Faye's Lexus. What the hell? I muttered to myself. Instinctively, I didn't like it. Not one bit. I swallowed hard. My thoughts were racing. Something was happening here, and I had a very bad feeling I wasn't going to like whatever it was. Movement draws the eye. I caught a glimpse of movement in the Hennings' backyard and turned the Shabu in that direction. I put the drone into slow descent mode, checking all around to make sure I didn't crash into the wall of one of the buildings, or a power cable, or something else. When I was sure I couldn't see any obstacles, I began to descend and approach. "Damn it!" I shouted, though no one could hear but me. 30 feet below and 50 feet further horizontally, my dear beloved wife Faye, along with Taylor Hennings and his wife Brianna, were enjoying a hot summer day. Or rather, they were doing just that. By the pool. "God damn you," moaned I. My stomach clenched in a powerful cramp. I was literally in pain. My wife was cheating on me. I took a deep, shuddering breath and did my best to contain my emotions, to suppress them, to keep functioning. Letting out a long, drawn-out sigh, I brought the drone closer. I was starting to get angry again, and I let it build up. Besides being able to defend myself against resentment, rage was good for me. It loosened the frozen emotions and freed up some of my brain energy so I could function. Rage, I discovered, was even better. I couldn't think of a single reason why Faye would have a relationship with the Hennings. I thought our marriage was pretty damn good. Obviously, I was wrong. Hell, judging by what was happening in front of the camera lens, I was completely clueless. I was 29 and Faye was 27. We'd been together for almost 5 years. We dated for a year, then dated for a year, were exclusive for almost another year, and then got married. 2 months ago was our 3rd wedding anniversary. My jaws were clenched. I forced my mind to stop spinning in circles. I had made decisions. This was what I had done in my professional life, and it was time to make one here and now. I was sure it was time to move on, literally and figuratively. I couldn't think of a single good reason why my wife would betray our marriage and me in this way. I pondered some more, testing my arguments and testing my resolve. I couldn't think of anything that could in any way change the belief that my marriage was over. Sighing, I took the first step down the new road of my life after Faye. First, I was going to make it clear to those bastards that the destruction of my world would not go without consequences. I made sure everything was being videotaped by the drone. It was, in glorious color and 1080p clarity. At 120 FPs, I would have slow motion, frame-by-frame progression, high-quality stills, everything I could possibly need or want for a divorce. I wasn't a fool. I knew things weren't going to work out financially. I had a friend who had just gotten divorced, and I sat with him many times when he lost his temper. Adultery means nothing in divorce court, not these days. There was no more personal responsibility for anything, including marriage. Everything was guilt-free. Our advanced society has gotten away from making judgmental decisions about cheating on a marriage vow. Gosh, aren't we much better off now? On the other hand, the courtroom is not the only place where divorce happens. I felt like everyone should know why the marriage failed and who caused it, so I gathered all the evidence I could. The drone approached the scene of the debauchery, the altitude steadily decreasing until the drone was only a few feet off the ground. I turned the Superb's main camera as close to horizontal as I could and adjusted the distance to them until the three bastards filled the screen. They didn't hear the drone, at least not until it got really close, because they were so busy. They didn't expect cameras to record their illegal actions. I didn't think about property rights or whether I had the right to record it. I didn't care either. I would pay a fine or whatever. I'd take care of it if the time came. Screw you, I said dismissively, raising my right hand and saluting them all with one finger, even though none of them saw it. I raised the drone another 15 feet, maneuvering it around the pool a few times in what might have seemed like gunfire. At least that's what I hoped. The sensors on the control panel told me that the charge in the onboard batteries was about to run out, and I backed up until the flyer was over the patio. Engaging the engines, I climbed as high as I could, flipped it into inverted flight, fired up the electric machines, and went into a dive with as much force as the machine was capable of. The monitor screen flashed brightly for a split second, then the light shrank to a pinpoint and went out. I hoped that the drone shattered into 1,000 pieces, but I didn't think it was possible. There just wasn't enough impact for that. But it was nice to dream. I sat staring at the blank screen for a long time, snorting derisively at my cheating wife, her cronies, and everything else that was supposed to go wrong in my life. I glanced at the wall clock. My world collapsed at 12:38 a.m. on Friday, July 5th. Happy holiday to me. I didn't know how my marriage was going to turn out next, and I was worried as hell about it. Chapter 2. To my surprise, it took my dear wife almost an hour to walk the few blocks from where she was with the Hennings to the house she and I had shared for the past 18 months. Actually, since we'd bought it. I remembered how hard it had been for us to find enough money for a down payment. The mortgage payments hadn't been easy either. But Faye wanted it to be a symbol that we were rising in the community of our town. She was so happy when we moved in. At the time, I was glad we did. Then she needed a new car to drive potential buyers, a new $60,000 car to be exact. Come to think of it, Faye got the house she wanted, while I settled for a glitchy desktop computer until my company provided me with a laptop. Faye got a stylish new car, and I got a flying toy that someone else didn't want. While waiting for her, I shortened my time watching the video I had made for the three of them. I even took the time to record a video of the highlights. I figured the video would come in handy someday. Faye flew through the door with a frantic scream. Her hair was still wet and hanging down her face. She was wearing the pantsuit she'd worn to work this morning, but it was wet in places. It looked like she had broken a heel somewhere, because she had one shoe on and the other was standing on a heel that had been moved crookedly to the side. "What the hell are you doing?" She wailed at the full capacity of her lungs. Her face was colored red, and her features became a mask of inhibitive rage. Her eyes threw lightning bolts at me. Obviously, she had guessed what the crashed drone on Henning Terrace meant. It had been a while since I'd sent the ship into an emergency dive, and I was beginning to have my doubts. I snorted. She was using an interesting tactic I'd often employed during hostile interviews with troubled managers and executives at one of my boss's corporations. Apparently, Faye had taken note of the old adage that the best defense is a good offense. For a second, I let a half smile curve my lips. That seemed to piss her off even more. Damn it! You could kill someone with that thing! She screamed. I just watched her. I couldn't find the woman I married in this screaming harridan standing in front of me. Faye was normally a very attractive woman, 5 feet and 4 inches tall. The shrew standing there, screaming at me with hatred on her face, was a snotty, frumpy caricature of a woman. What's the matter with you, asshole? She yelled. Nah, I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe some sort of apology, maybe remorse. Obviously, no. Then again, I might have taken offense. You goddamn slut! Roared I. I'm just under 6 feet tall, and I have a pretty deep voice with plenty of lung power. No doubt she heard me loud and clear. That got her attention. Go upstairs and wash the stink off of those 2 assholes right now. There was nothing on her face that I could see, but my words quickly silenced her. Maybe a tiny remnant of conscience? Maybe she actually felt a modicum of shame? She had the nobility to just turn away and waddle down the stairs on her only remaining heel. It's unclear why she didn't take off both shoes earlier. And Faye! I turned to her, moderating my volume and tone. When you go back downstairs, you better keep a polite tongue in your head, understand? You've disrespected our marriage enough in one day, and I won't. I'm not going to put up with your yelling anymore, do you understand? She didn't answer, didn't nod or anything, but rose without protest. A moment later, I heard the shower turn on in our bedroom. Faye came back downstairs 15 minutes later, faster than I thought she would, but maybe she was itching to get it over with. Perhaps she couldn't wait to justify herself, though I doubted she'd be apologizing at this point. If she had those thoughts, she'd be taking a much longer shower. I know her. My Faye hates admitting she's wrong about anything. It would take twice as long to talk herself into admitting fault. She was dressed in one of my old long-sleeve sweatshirts, a pair of blue jeans and sneakers. Why don't you have a seat? I asked her politely from the living room. I gestured to the couch facing the wide coffee table. I sat in my lazy boy, placing my feet on the floor instead of on the footrest. She took off her sneakers in front of the couch, sat down, and tucked her bare feet under her. She opened her mouth, but I interrupted her. I'd like to understand a couple things, if you don't mind, I told her. I guess number 1 is, why in the hell did you suddenly decide to become the neighbor's whore? Faye jerked backward, slumping into the pillow. I apologize, I added hastily. I was distracted from my thoughts for a second. I'll try to keep my voice down. I took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. If you'd be so kind, I said in an overly polite tone, could you tell me why you decided to destroy our marriage? Matt, babe, Faye said in a measured tone. I'm so sorry you had to see that at the Hennings. I caught on to that. In my profession, people are always picking up words. You're sorry I had to see it, I replied. But you're not sorry you did. Is that what you mean? Interrupted me. Faye's lips pressed together. Dear, she said, not wanting to answer my question. She persisted in returning to her earlier phrase. It doesn't have to go on like this. We can get through this, and we can actually make things better. I should have talked to you before. I know that now. She leaned forward on the couch. Look, Matt, it's not like I was a virgin when we got married, and neither were you. We both know that. I haven't done anything with Taylor and Brianna that I haven't done before. Mostly with you, okay? She paused, watching my reaction carefully. Look, honey, all we have to do is make some adjustments, and everything will be fine. She watched me carefully. I clenched my jaw and didn't say a word. Truth be told, I wondered where she was going with this. There was no sign of apology, only regret that I had caught her. I gestured for her to continue. And I am not a whore or a harlot, she added, clearly taken aback by my words. Don't you dare call me that. I made no comment. It was just sex and, she told me. Damn it! I interjected sharply, slamming my right hand on my knee. I shook my head disappointedly. I read about shit like what happened here. You know there are a lot of sites where betrayed spouses get together in support groups? I asked, almost rhetorically. Apparently, it was just sex is the second most common excuse cheating sluts use, I continued. And I was aiming for number one, damn it. The most frequently used bullshit. I made a few air quotes with my fingers. It's not what it seems, honey. Or something like that. Damn it, Faye. Can't you be a little more creative? Faye's facial features tensed. It was just fun, baby, she objected vigorously. That's all it was. Just 3 people having fun during the day. That's all. Having fun, replied I. I must have misunderstood. Hell, I thought it was something else. Well, the hell with it, I replied. I should have known better, right? I'm sure the smirk on my face was more of a grimace than an expression of enthusiasm. I leaned forward in my chair, feigning enthusiasm. Hey, you know what? I asked in a conspiratorial tone. I like fun. Can you tell me why I wasn't included in this, fun? Faye lowered her eyes, showing a bit of remorse for the first time. It wasn't much, and it was fleeting, but perhaps there was hope in it. We were going to bring you, she muttered. Huh? Bring me in, Bring me in, I repeated. And what does that mean, Faye? I asked mockingly. Does it mean that you 3 super cool guys are going to let me join your secret club? Is that what you meant, darling? Mockingly, I asked. She didn't answer right away, so I immediately cut to the chase. Bull! Shit! I snapped back. You didn't want me to find out. That bring me in is some bullshit phrase the 3 of you made up on the fly after you found out you got caught. Faye hid behind her eyelids for a moment. Okay, she muttered, opening her eyes again but refusing to look me in the eye. You're right. We just didn't think. We should have organized things from the beginning so that you would be included in the process. No. I shot back before she could finish. She didn't understand. What you should have done is ask me if I think we, Mr. and Mrs. Singletary, as a married couple, as husband and wife who have made a vow not to have relations with other people, should at least consider loosening that obligation and going out to have fun. Isn't that what you should have done, Faye? I asked. Damn you! She threw back at me, her face contorted with renewed anger, and she blushed. Okay. Yeah, I had to do that. I screwed up. I'm sorry. Yes, you screwed up. I agreed. You took the liberty of betraying the marriage and mocking our wedding vows. Why don't you explain why I have no say in such matters? Damn it. You've taken it upon yourself to decide for both of us? What the hell, Faye? Baby, it's not too late, replied Faye seriously, ignoring everything I had just asked. Yes, I realize I should have come to you first, and then everything would have been out in the open. But we can't change that now, right? We don't have the ability to go back in time and make things right. I shrugged uncertainly. Just for fun, I said. How come you didn't even think to talk to me back then, huh? Why did you think it was okay to make a decision that was ultimately going to affect both of us and our marriage? Can you answer me that? She waved her hands helplessly. Apparently she didn't have an explanation and didn't think she needed one? Very curious. I growled. I sucked in a big gulp of air and let it out. Well, okay, let me ask this question from a different angle. I'm really trying to make sense of some things. Please tell me why you didn't even bother to ask me if I wanted to join a small club, I asked. You said you were just... What did you say? Just 3 people having fun, right? Hell, like I said. I like to have fun, probably as much as anyone else, I continued. Why didn't you even think about the fact that your old husband likes to party too? You could talk me into it if you could explain how it might affect our marriage. I'm just curious, dear wife, why didn't you... what should I call it? Invite me to the group from the beginning? Why wasn't my opinion important enough to be asked when you were organizing everything, eh? I paused. Why? I don't know, Faye admitted, hanging her head. I don't remember. Well, maybe because I didn't think you'd actually do it, she added after a moment's thought. There, now we're getting somewhere, said I. Did you decide that I wouldn't want to do it? If that's the case, why didn't it occur to you that doing it needs to be done? She didn't answer. The expression on her face indicated disappointment. There were many things Faye didn't want to discuss in this conversation. Rightness and wrongness were two of them. So I preempted the conversation again, going back to what I had said earlier. I'm just a stick in the mud, and you guys are the cool ones, the ones who know how to have fun. And besides, you're smart. You can do all sorts of things that us second-class, unplugged people can't do, right? It wasn't like that, protested Faye. I just didn't think you... There it was again. I wondered how to get through to her. Okay. So you didn't think I'd agree to get involved, I said slowly. You assumed that your husband, your marriage partner, would be against having fun outside of marriage. A prenup, you might say. But you did it anyway. Don't I have a right to think that's a bad thing? Tell me, please. How did you decide that ignoring my feelings was a good thing? Faye understood where my question was going. She didn't want to go there and shook her head irritably, ignoring my questions and going back to her own. Matt, babe, you know I wasn't a virgin when we met? You even know who I was dating back then, remember? And I know who you were with, too. It was Caitlin, remember? The girl you were sleeping with when we first met? See? She stared at me for a minute. When I didn't respond in any way, she apparently became encouraged and assumed I had accepted her point of view. I didn't. But I was beginning to realize that Faye was confusing things that happened before she and I swore to maintain our relationship with things that shouldn't happen after. Matt, I know you're not a prude or anything. You can't be upset about. She lowered the volume and went an octave. At what? I did with Brianna, right? And she became a little more cautious. And what Taylor was doing to me was doing to me. It wasn't something you haven't done a million times, right? So, I interrupted her, chopping off her right arm with a tomahawk motion. No, Faye. It's not that you did it. It's that you did it, and you shouldn't have done it, damn it. She didn't like that at all. She tried to come to her senses. But, wait, Matt. You just said you wouldn't mind doing Brianna. You said that. Faye leaned forward for emphasis. It's not too late to make things right, honey. I screwed up really badly. I just didn't think properly by not including you from the start. But we can put it behind us. She pulled her legs out from under her and lowered them to the floor. She pushed her ass to the edge of the couch cushion and leaned toward me to emphasize her words and impress me with her sincerity. Listen, Matt. Listen. Here's what we can do, kid. Faye reached out to me as if she wanted to touch my hand or something, but she was too far away to reach me across the large expanse of carpet. I'm sure the look on my face was a little anticipatory, too. I was thinking at that moment that I'd rather cuddle with a big cockroach than let Faye's hand touch me. At any rate, she didn't get up to approach me. Taylor and Brianna and I were talking after, said Faye, after the damn thing fell down at their house. She stammered heavily, clearly trying to avoid saying anything that might piss me off again. What we can do, Taylor suggested it, honey. What we can do is that you can be with me and Brianna, or just one of us if you want that. And for 3 months, Taylor can have no one but his wife to make up for the time you've lost. Her words cut off. I wondered if she belatedly realized how vile and mean it sounded. So, I take it 3 months is how long you've been having fun, right? I asked. Faye nodded, almost imperceptibly. Is that true? 3 freaking months? I was getting more and more annoyed. Answer me, damn it! I growled when she stiffened. Hell yeah, it's only 3 months, Matt. She paused. So, how about it, honey? Can we fix this and move on? Do you want me to call Brianna right now, babe? She asked almost pleadingly. Good God, no! I replied mockingly. Why? Why were you cheating on me behind my back, damn it, Faye? She didn't answer right away, still shocked. Why? I shouted again, leaning forward in my chair. Faye's eyes became round and huge. Why did you decide to entertain these two damned losers, knowing I wouldn't like it? Shouted I. She swallowed hard, clutching at the seat cushion with both hands. Why? Faye shook her head like a boxer trying to shake off a storm of punches to the head. Answer me, damn it! Why? Growled I. Because I wanted to! She screamed. Why don't you grow up, Matt? I wanted to step outside of this damn box we're in. And I had a hell of a lot of fun doing it, damn you, she added. I did it because I could and because I wanted to. She took a deep breath and looked at me. This is my body, she continued, making a sweeping gesture with her hand down her torso. Damn you. I'm the only one who has the right to say who and what does what to my body, and no one else. I studied her for a moment, just looking at her. Faye, I don't get it. Where did you get this shit, huh? You're so much smarter than this. Who's been pushing this crap on you? She couldn't or wouldn't answer. I shrugged. If she didn't want to participate, I could continue. Yes, I agree, I told her quietly. You have every right to say who does what to you, I told her more calmly than before. But when we got married, you exercised that right, didn't you? Didn't you agree that we were exclusive? I paused to let her know that. Judging by the look on her face, she didn't appreciate my words. Rather, she was offended that I brought up the topic. But I have rights too, Faye, I remarked. For example, I have the right to say whether or not I'll tolerate what you do to someone else with your body, and I'll exercise that right when I decide whether or not to stay married to you. I paused again, wondering if she wanted to say anything. She didn't. Just so you know, I told her, pulling away. Right now, at this moment, I don't think we're going to be married very long. From my point of view, you've ruined the whole marriage, and there's no point in even trying to rebuild it. She was shocked. Her face froze and her eyes reflected utter amazement. Apparently, she hadn't even considered the fact that I would divorce her because she was just having a lot of fun. This was very strange to me. As I had told her, she was much smarter than she acted. I didn't understand what she was getting at, not at all. Apparently, she didn't have a quick answer, so I went straight back to the conversation. So, that's it? I asked calmly. No sense of responsibility? No respect for me as your husband? Your partner in this marriage? You haven't even thought about the fact that husbands and wives aren't supposed to cheat on each other, or and shouldn't be having fun with each other behind each other's backs, have you? None of that? None of that at all? She shook her head. The tears were finally starting to flow. The problem was, I think they were tears of frustration, not remorse. It's just, if I want to, I can do it, right? I continued. You think you can do it with anyone outside of our marriage, regardless of what I think or what anyone else thinks? Just, I wanted to do it. And I did it because it was fun? Is that what you're telling me? She didn't answer. Wow, I exclaimed with fake enthusiasm. That really sums it all up in one little slimy, pus-filled bag, doesn't it? Screw you! My soon-to-be ex-girlfriend shouted. She'd had enough. She didn't like being backed into a corner even at the best of times, and she especially didn't like having to explain herself. Faye jumped up from the couch and ran for the stairs. In her opinion, nothing was her fault. I was just being immature and selfish. I was rude and ruined all of her fun. I was just angry. Remember, Faye, I growled, looking at her rapidly disappearing back. You wanted to do this, and you did it because it was fun. You remember that, Faye. I got up from my lazy boy chair and walked from the living room to my home office, where my laptop lay open and loaded in the middle of my desk. It looked like I had the answers to my questions. There was no particular remorse, maybe a little regret, but not much. Presumably, Faye regretted not involving me in the debauchery from the start, but I wasn't really sure about that. Perhaps the regret was due to the fact that they'd been exposed. It probably was. Faye had been deceiving me for at least 3 months, and I had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. My wife could have lied about the timing, and I had no idea if the asswipes were the first to strip my wife. I decided that Faye was probably still lying. She wanted me to just back off and let bygones be bygones. In reality, they all wanted me to just stop being annoyed. Brianna was apparently willing to take responsibility and get on with it to make up for lost time. They didn't want it to have any repercussions and bite them in the ass. They didn't want it to come under the harsh public eye. They knew, whether they discussed it or not, deep down, they knew that their relatives and the vast majority of people they were friends with, associated with, or worked with would not approve of what they were doing. No, sir. They didn't want anyone to know about all this. But since they didn't want anyone to know about it, I did. I wasn't completely honest with Faye. I didn't mention what I've seen on those websites where people try to comfort and counsel betrayed spouses. The statistics I cited were there. But they also advised exposing the cheating, exposing far and wide, and making sure everyone knew what the cheating spouse was doing. That was the first step to repairing the marriage, they said. I didn't know how to fix my marriage, but I could expose it. I already had almost everything I needed. I had already watched a fairly short clip shot from the drone and knew what scenes I needed to include in the short AV file. That snippet where Faye is looking back at the drone, probably perplexed as to what the hell is going on. It wasn't even 2:30 yet. There was plenty of time. I called Mr. Rutherford, the owner of the real estate agency she worked for. "Thank you for calling Rutherford Real Estate. What can I do for you?" Old Mr. Rutherford himself said when the connection was established. I recognized his voice. Apparently, he had given his secretary the day off. "Mr. Rutherford," said I in a serious voice. "Is this Matt Singletary, Faye's husband?" "Yes, Matt," he answered immediately. There was a warmth in his voice. Last year before Labor Day, his agency had had a banner month for new home sales. To celebrate, he had a big picnic on a piece of land he owned in a hilly area west of town, and everyone associated with the agency, as well as their spouses and children, attended. Rutherford and I spent quite a bit of time chatting about anything that came into his head. "Sir," I continued slowly, not knowing exactly how to introduce this. "Mr. Rutherford, do you happen to have an email address where I could send you something urgent? Like right now? I need to send you a short video clip." "Uh-huh. On a matter that I think needs your immediate attention," I said as if formally. "Sure thing, son," he replied. "And call me Martin, okay?" Within seconds, I had his personal email address. I sent him a message and attached a newly shot video of an afternoon date between my wife, Taylor Hennings, and his wife. I waited for good old Martin to receive the email and absorb its contents. "My God in heaven," he finally sighed. "My goodness. I'm so sorry, Matt," he said softly. "I had no idea." "I had no idea either, Martin," I replied stoically. "But I wanted to draw your attention, sir, to the fact that this all took place just after noon today. See the timestamp in the lower right-hand corner? It actually happened before that, of course. I have no idea what time this little orgy started, but I only know when it ended, and that was just after you saw the last bit of action. The thing is, sir, one of your managers and his wife are doing this to a subordinate, my wife, and it's going on 24 hours a day. They're doing this kind of shit at your expense." He was silent for a long moment. I'm sure he suspected that this situation was a textbook example of a lawsuit just waiting to happen, and I was willing to bet I had grounds to file one. What this adulterous trio had done had certainly caused great pain and suffering in my life. Isn't that how many lawsuits begin? And since the case took place during business hours when both were supposed to be working, Mr. Rutherford's nice little business could have been sued for every last dime. But I didn't even broach the subject. "I'm open to suggestions," he said cautiously. "Oh, I haven't any suggestions, sir," I replied. "It's your business you're running there, and I'm just calling your attention to some irregularities. What you do with this information is entirely up to you. I see, he said hesitantly, and perhaps a little incredulously. Absolutely, Mr. Rutherford. I will divorce my wife, of course, so these men of yours have ruined the marriage, but what you do with them as your employees is entirely up to you. All right? Well, sir, I need to get off the line and, well, I've got some necessary business to do, as Grandma used to say. Goodbye, sir, and thank you for your kindness, I told him. I, well, goodbye to you too, Matt. I'm very, very sorry for what happened. It's not your fault, Mr. Rutherford. It's just that some people don't have much sense of decency. Goodbye, sir. I tapped the disconnect icon and moved on to the next item on my list. I created a text message group that included all of Faye's family members, all of her siblings and her mother and father, all of her friends, those whose cell phone numbers I knew, and any neighbors who shared their phone numbers with us. I attached the same video clip I had sent to Mr. Rutherford to the group message and sent it on its way. Then I began to wait. The unmasking of these three happy idiots was going to happen in a big way, and their small, crystal-perfect world was going to come crashing down. Faye walked slowly down the stairs and held onto the railing at the bottom for a long time before she pulled herself together. I guessed that she wanted to try one more time to reason with me and sway me to her side. Honey, she started, you talk about it too much, baby. Look, we're all adults and a little fun is not going to affect our marriage in any way. I love you, you know that, don't you? I would never do anything to intentionally hurt you, honey. I just got it all mixed up. I know you're the one I should have talked to in the first place. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. And I want to make it up to you in every way I can, okay? I settled back into my lazy boy chair and waited. I didn't really listen to much of what she was saying. Anything she could say wasn't going to change anything anymore. The phone on the kitchen wall rang loudly. Annoyed, Faye looked in that direction but didn't move from her seat. I think you should answer it, I told her without any heat in my voice. I think it's for you. Stepping to the left, toward the kitchen doorway, Faye took the receiver off the hook and brought the machine to her ear. Oh, hi, Dad. Listen, I can't talk to you right now. Can I call you? I really thought Mr. Rutherford would call first, but her father was apparently more nimble. I could hear him all the way over here. What are you doing, Fairy Ann? He yelled. What kind of movie is this? Sure, it wasn't a movie, but Faye's father had grown up in a very different era. Faye turned around abruptly and stared at me with a look of horror on her face. I wasn't sure she even breathed for a few seconds. It seemed to me that Faye's little universe was already starting to collapse. Remember what you said, Faye? I asked, loud enough for her to hear me. You did what you did because you could, and because it was fun, right? I reminded her. She stared at me numbly. She listened to her father tearing her up one side and down the other, but I don't think she understood a single word he said. Well, baby, I continued, I did what you said. I did it because I could, and I gotta tell you, it was a hell of a lot of fun. That last part was just rude, but I was not in a charitable mood. The phone, issued to her by Mr. Rutherford's agency, played the Star Wars theme and started dancing across the coffee table where she'd left it. I picked it up, pressed the accept call icon, and walked over to hand it to her. Here, this is for you, I told her. She automatically took it in her right hand, while her father was still yelling at her from the house phone she held in her left. Old man Rutherford was furious too. Faye didn't have the speakerphone on, but I could hear her boss as clearly and easily as I could hear her father. In rather harsh terms, but no profanity, he never used four-letter words, Rutherford informed my dear soon-to-be ex-wife that her job was terminated as of this moment, as was Mr. Asswipe's. He also said that if Faye wanted to pick up her last check and personal belongings, she needed to hurry. She needs to be at the office in half an hour, or she will find the doors locked, and she will never be allowed inside in the future. He'll mail everything to her. Snap! I turned and headed out the door to pull my 12-year-old Land Rover up to the porch. I had a bunch of my stuff to load into it soon, and I wanted the haul to be as short as possible. I didn't care about the deep ruts the big tires would make in the grass between the driveway and the porch. I didn't live here anymore, and the lawn was now someone else's concern, not mine. A few minutes later, Faye popped out the front door screaming, "You're a bastard!" at the top of her lungs. She repeated it several times before getting into her car, starting the engine, and driving off. I snorted derisively. My parents had actually been married for 3 years before I was born, and I definitely wasn't a bastard, but I didn't care about her opinion anymore. My phone beeped once, and then several more times in a row. Since I had sent the video to many of the members of the group message, their replies and comments were being sent to everyone else in the group, including me. A quick look at some of the messages showed that Faye had been viciously abused by her older brother and all of her sisters, as well as other relatives, friends, and neighbors. I loaded all my clothes, weapons, and other personal belongings. They made a pitiful pile that easily fit into the Land Rover. Taking one last walk around the house to see if I'd missed anything, I slipped the holster on my belt, checked the .38 caliber Glock pistol I usually carried concealed, and tucked it under my shirt. The house was now hostile territory, and from now on, I would be walking around with a gun. When I was done, I quickly called my mom and dad and briefly told them what had happened during the day. I asked if I could stay with them for a while. The only question they asked was to ask if I would make it in time for dinner or if they should keep something warm in the oven. It was nice to know that there was someone left in the world that I could rely on. Chapter 3rd. Thinking back on that day, and to a lesser extent, the week that followed, I must admit that even I was amazed at how quickly things went from 0 to DEFCON 5 in the blink of an eye. A cocked gun, indeed. That's what the military calls operations under DEFCON 5 conditions. Given Faye's lack of remorse, the question of whether to work on the marriage wasn't even a bump on the road to nuclear detonation. Heck, it wasn't even a drawn line in the road. I never argued with myself about what I should do. The ability to analyze problems on the fly and find solutions quickly was one of my most valuable talents at the firm where I worked. Where others wanted to study an issue to death, hold a meeting, and debate endlessly the possible outcomes of any proposed action, I made decisions and put them into action. The vast majority of the time, what I decided to do worked. Sometimes what I did wasn't the absolute best solution in hindsight, but whatever I decided to do was always better than a long period of inaction. It invariably saved the company time and money that would have been wasted trying to find the best possible solution. Faye thought I was making a mountain out of a tiny hill. She thought she had the right to make arbitrary decisions regarding marriage without the slightest regard for my opinion or how it would affect our marriage. It was pure bullshit. I didn't even bother to consider the best course of action. I just did what my instincts told me to do. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I did what I did. I've been told there's a fine line between love and hate. Perhaps there is. I remember being more than surprised when I realized that the love I had for Faye had turned into a dying coal by the time our little conversation was over. What little remained quickly faded away in the days that followed. I remembered that I loved her, but it was like an echo roaming the mountains. At first it's strong and bright, but as it echoes off the rocky ridges, it fades into a whisper, and then the whisper dies. I focused on the solution I thought was most appropriate: divorce. Part of my thinking was how to get out from under the massive debt for the big house we bought, and for Faye's expensive car, so we could live separately. My biggest goal was to get out of this situation with as much of our credit rating intact as possible. A couple weeks after the day I exposed all this crap, I called Faye's dad, who was still furious at his daughter, and at me too, for all these grandstanding, as he put it. Eventually, I was able to calm him down and discuss what was best for Faye and me. He understood my decision not to even try to repair the marriage, even if Faye was agreeable. It followed that Faye and I needed to put the house on the market as soon as possible. I could keep up the mortgage payments by eating bologna sandwiches for lunch every day and living like a monk, but I didn't want to do that. I'd quit my job and hunt rattlesnakes in Big Bend country before I'd make a payment on a house I didn't need from the start. Faye, as a junior real estate agent, had only a measly little salary and a commission on any property she sold, but she never sold anything. All the commissions went to the more senior employees. After the day, she didn't even have that tiny income, so she couldn't afford a house either. It wasn't hard to convince Faye's father that we needed to put the house on the market as soon as possible, because once my funds ran out and I stopped paying the mortgage, the house would quickly go into foreclosure. This would hurt our credit rating and affect each of us for many, many years to come. That included Faye's fancy Lexus. I told her dad that I absolutely could not make the payments, and neither could she, so it needed to be sold, and fast. We were penniless in the house and the Lexus was underwater. But if we decided to sell it now, it would pay dividends years from now when our marriage would be nothing but a fading nightmare. Faye's father agreed with me and apparently convinced Faye. I think he convinced my soon-to-be ex-wife that if she resisted, I wouldn't even try to fix our finances. I would just drop everything, cash out my 401k, harness my Range Rover, and drive off to who knows where, leaving her to deal with the consequences. Anyway, we managed to sell the house pretty quickly. I had to pay some realtor fees that I wouldn't normally pay, but it wasn't too bad. I traded Faye's Lexus for a 6-year-old Ford, paid cash to make up the shortfall, and transferred the title to Faye, free and clear. That way, she'd have some transportation. However, the insurance and the cost of maintaining the car fell on her. I felt like that was all that could be expected of me. When it was over, I got what was left of my 401k and my share of the tiny amounts we had in our checking account and savings. And best of all, I didn't have a lot of debt. Mission accomplished. We divorced on a do-it-yourself basis since neither of us could afford an attorney. I filed the paperwork and did my best to divide everything equally in the division of property. I was moderately surprised that Faye quickly agreed to my proposal, considering how unreasonable she was the day I confronted her. Apparently someone, probably her father, had made her realize that arguing about the almost non-existent marital property was futile. Fortunately, we didn't have children in time to have children, so the issue of custody and child support never came up. Spousal maintenance was also out of the question. We were simply not married for the minimum amount of time required. The do-it-yourself divorce only cost a couple $100 and had the added benefit of a very short waiting period. So, 4 months, 1 week, and a few days after I caught Mr. and Mrs. Jopolis with my wife, the divorce was final. I gathered all my feelings and memories of my broken marriage, locked them in my mind behind a door labeled Faye, Do Not Open, and embarked on the next phase of my life. Christmas that year, shortly after I received the final decree in the mail, wasn't so bad. I spent it with my mom and dad. It was quiet, but very good for the soul. We exchanged gifts, ate a huge turkey dinner, and visited friends and a few distant relatives in the evening. A week after the new year, I quit my job at Reese Donaldson. It was a good job. I was treated very well there, and respected too. Mr. Donaldson thought I was accepting a position at another firm and offered me an executive-level salary if I stayed, but I had to decline. I assured him that I was not the target of some corporate headhunter. I had simply lost interest in the business and wanted to move in a different direction. He understood, but reluctantly, and organized a terrific going-away party for me. He said that if I suddenly changed my mind, I would call him before I went anywhere. By Valentine's Day, I was unemployed, unsure of my future, and, very curiously, quite happy with myself and life in general. I sat at Mom's kitchen table and watched Dad carve a ferocious mountain lion out of a piece of wood the size of a loaf of bread while Mom cooked dinner. Dad was a master woodcarver, and Mom could have been a chef if she had been so inclined, and if she had received some formal training in that field. They were both very dear to me. Dad wasn't my real father. Biologically, he was my Uncle Tom, my father's younger brother. My mom was his wife, Leah. They took me in after my parents were killed in a highway accident when I was 9 years old. Tom and Leah were childless when they took me in, and I remained their only child. One of them couldn't have children. They never tried to find out if Tom's swimmers could have done it, or if it was Leah's plumbing. They just didn't want to know. They felt that knowing might carry a tinge of guilt, and they didn't want that malignant tumor growing in their relationship. They loved each other too much to waste time on such things. They were as kind and caring to me as they could ever be. Through their love, they helped me through the loss of my parents. It wasn't easy and it wasn't particularly quick, but eventually I recovered. My father, Uncle Tom, already had a reputation as a tough, stern sheriff when I came to live with them. He did a lot to rid his county of outlaw bikers and drug dealers who tried to set up meth labs in the hills, as well as deal with all the other mischief people do to their neighbors. He had been sheriff for a little over 21 years when he retired. The first time I saw tears in his eyes was the day he drove me to school in his patrol car, provided by the county. I proudly introduced him to everyone I saw on campus as my daddy, and that was indeed true. One time Aunt Leah chaperoned a dance. I was a second grader in high school, and I made sure everyone knew I was asking my mom to dance with me before I even thought about asking any of the girls. All the girls and teachers thought it was so cute. I decided it was the right thing to do to show everyone how I felt about my mom. That night when I asked them if they would like to adopt me as their son, all they did was hug each other and cry, and it made me cry with them. We were very close, and I didn't think of them as mom and dad anymore. "We think we're just giving you your inheritance right now," Dad said. "Not waiting until we're dead, you know. You get it now, while you're still young and can do something with it." He was talking about transferring ownership of the ranch to me. At the ages of 53 and 51, he and my mom decided they wanted to buy a big RV and travel forever across the country. They had already bought it, as well as a miniature Jeep to lug around for local transportation wherever they parked the van. They planned to visit Glacier National Park first, then head to the Grand Canyon, and, well, they had a whole bunch of places they wanted to visit. "But Dad," I replied quietly, "that's too much. Yeah, I know you all want to travel and all that, but you need some place to call home. Some place when you get tired of wandering around all the time, where you can go to relax and unwind." "Yeah, we know that, son. That's why we bought this house on the north side of town. It will be there when we need it, and it's just between the three of us, your mom and I. Well, we really don't want this place anymore. We didn't want to farm and raise cattle and horses. We just fell into it when we decided I was going to retire from the county. It was just a place we'd come to when I folded my badge, and somehow we never got a chance to leave. Now we have a chance, you know what I mean?" Oh, I see," I remarked, pretending to take offense. "You don't want it anymore, so I got the hand ranch, and now I'm stuck here, is that it?" "No," replied Dad calmly. "The land here is just flat and worn out and not good for farming at all, and most of the springs are dried up, so you can't get cattle or horses. But the oil companies keep poking around, exploring and all that. A couple of them have already made an offer, and they're coming back to do it again. This time, you can get a better price from them and sell the damn place." I thought about it. Once upon a time, this estate started out as one 640-acre parcel of land, plus another 300-plus acres nearby. Grandpa, my father's father, bought that tract from a widow when he moved here, and after a particularly successful season, he grabbed a second tract as well. My father didn't like farming, which is why he went to law enforcement from the beginning, and he didn't want to work the land from dawn to dusk anyway. He sold off the property every chance he got, and we were left with only about 500 acres of the original 1-mile parcel. A separate 300 acres went to a farmer whose land bordered those acres. "All right, Dad, I'll do it," I told him. "But it's really too much. Maybe I'll take it, sell it all, and then we'll split the profits 3 ways, you, me, and Mom. What do you say?" "How about we divide 80 by 20, and you send us letters twice a week and call us every Sunday?" Mom intervened in a non-objectionable tone. She walked from the stove to where I was sitting in the kitchen chair and looked at me judgmentally. The chair stood on its 2 back legs, and I leaned with my back against the wall. She wrapped her arms around my head and kissed my forehead. We love you, son, she whispered. Please let us do this. I glanced at my father. He had gone back to his carving and wasn't paying any attention to me. He didn't even bother to answer my question, nor did he need to. The negotiation was in Mom's hands now, and Dad knew full well that I couldn't tell Mom no to anything. I tried to confront her at least a little. How about a 50-50 split? I text and email you all the time and call you on Sundays, all legal holidays and birthdays, I suggested. Deal, objected Mom instantly. Now put that dangerous chair on all four legs and go clean up for dinner, she commanded. She looked at my father. Tom? My father had already gathered his carving tools and was on his way from the kitchen to the garage where he kept his tools and projects. I had to hurry to get cleaned up and come back to help my mom set the table. That's how it happened. In early April of that year, I was standing on the porch of Mom and Dad's old house, watching them slowly drive their new house down the gravel road to the state highway 3 miles away when I caught Faye. The beautifully appointed interior of this 40-foot monstrosity had every amenity known to man, including a full shower and a queen-sized bed. Behind them, they dragged a tiny Korean-made contraption so they could park it and take in the local sights, towns, or whatever else they decided to do that day. As they traveled up the climb a mile from the house and down the other side, I sighed and went back to my house, even though it didn't feel like home anymore. From the outside, it seemed like a typical, worn farmhouse, the kind many built around 1930. With his background in law enforcement, my father had decided not to make the house he had set up for his wife and son an attractive target for villains of all stripes. The inside of the house had all the necessities. A 70-inch 4K TV dominated the living room, and Dad had installed the best home theater sound system money could buy. The furniture was large, soft, and comfortable. The rest of the house was furnished in the same manner. On the back side of the house, Dad built a large wooden deck with a grill and a stone smoker because he and Mom often barbecued. We had a great 20 by 35-foot pool, deep enough on one side for diving and big enough for Mom to do laps whenever she wanted. Mom had been on the swim team when she was in high school and still loved swimming for practice. A few days after they left, I finished inventorying everything in the house, all the farm equipment and livestock. I had 14 horses, a small herd of 23 buffalo, and 47 head of longhorn. Once upon a time, for whatever reason, Grandpa had dreamed of having a nature park. Also on the property were the contents of both barns. I started selling off everything I could, except the housewares. The first to be sold was a large John Deere tractor that I had parked at the gate on the state highway. I got a very good price for it. In fact, it was a good deal for both me and the farmer who bought it. I decided to see if I could sell everything else the same way. It worked. There were people driving down the road who farmed or ranched for a living, and if they weren't at the market, they knew someone who was. Farm and ranch equipment was selling out at a rapid pace. In May, it was a Friday, I got a call on my landline. At first, I thought it was my mom, since it was her turn to call. Hi, I said. How are you? Good afternoon. Is this Mr. Singletary? It wasn't Mom, and besides, I didn't like the patronizing tone of the young woman's voice. It seemed like she was doing me a favor by letting me talk to her. I took advantage of a technique my father had used when he was sheriff. He often used an exaggerated Texas accent and pretended to be an uneducated, not-so-smart redneck when interrogating particularly tough suspects. They didn't realize what was going on until their father gave them enough rope to hang themselves. Once he had all the information the state's attorney needed, he would squeeze them tight and take them to jail. Some of them never realized what had happened. Yeah, sure, I replied slowly. It's the coast. It's Matt Singletary himself. Please wait for Mr. Wingate. The line went silent, and I hung up. About 3 minutes later, the phone rang again. Mr. Singletary? The same woman asked. You could hear the irritation in her voice. Yes, of course, I answered. Are you still holding on to that guy, Winsley? I asked, feigning curiosity. No, Mr. Singletary. I meant to tell you to hang on, not, oh no, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. I only stick with women. I just don't think it's appropriate for a man to catch another man, you know. There was silence, accompanied by the sound of an incredulous breath, and then a sigh from the young woman. Ah, no, sir, I meant to say, I wanted to ask you if you could wait a moment so that I could call for Mr. Winslet and Mr. Wingate, uh, on the telephone line as soon as possible. Would you mind doing that? Oh, of course. Yes, ma'am, I can certainly do that. How far would you have to travel to find him? I asked interestedly. You'll have him soon, she replied, avoiding my question. I couldn't tell if she was about to giggle or if she was biting her lip to keep from yelling at me. Either way, she sounded much more human and down to earth now. In fact, it was a little longer than soon. I was willing to bet she was repeating the highlights of our preliminary conversation with this Mr. Wingate, so he knew what he was dealing with. Good afternoon, Mr. Singletary. I'm George Wingate of the firm of Christopher, Stump, and Presley. How are you today, sir? I am perfectly well, really quite all right, I told him. And how are Christy and Bump and Elvis? I asked. I thought I heard a muffled female giggle in the receiver, but maybe it wasn't. Uh, um, we're doing really well. Thanks for asking, Tom? Can I call you Tom? Well, sir, I guess you can if you just want to, I replied. But my real name is Matt, so I don't know why you want to call me Tom. Well, actually, Matthew is my real name, but people call me Matt. My friends anyway. Ah, all right, said Mr. Wingate. May I speak to Tom? Please. No, I replied firmly. There was a waiting pause. May I ask why not? Asked Mr. Wingate. It was evident that he was slightly annoyed. He's not here, replied I. Another silence ensued. Before Mr. Wingate could say anything more, I decided that I had squeezed all I could out of myself. What's more, I was getting a little tired of it. Daddy gave me the whole damn ranch, signed it over to me, and then rode off on a gold mine to God knows where. It was him and my mom. You want me to tell them when I hear from them? Well, no. You seem to be just the person we need to talk to. Your father passed the title on to you, didn't he? I didn't say PA once, so I realized I'd gotten in his head. He was trying to get back at me, trying to disrespect me by not letting me know what he was doing. I grinned. Yeah, shore it up, I said to the pretentious Mr. Wingate. Yes, Matt, he continued. A few days ago, a team from SunCloud Petroleum was near your property and noticed that you were selling a few pieces of farm equipment, and we were wondering if... Uh-oh, I interrupted. I'm sorry, but the John Deere has already been sold to that nice Mr. Jenkins in Wister Lake, and the hay baler, and the disc machine, and that big darn plow. But there's plenty more stuff I can sell you if you want to buy. No, replied Wingate sharply. He paused. Matt, we'd like to make an appointment with you to discuss the sale of your ranch. That's what you're doing, isn't it? We represent SunCloud, and I assure you we are prepared to offer you a very favorable price for the land you own. Can we offer you a first-class round-trip ticket to Oklahoma City, wherever your local terminal is, and we can discuss everything in detail? Why would I want to go to Oklahoma City? I asked in a puzzled voice. Well, that's where SunCloud and our firm, Mr. Singletary, are located. I chuckled. You really had me going there, I told him. But I can't fly in any of those airplanes. No. I get really seasick when I do, I explained. Say, why don't you and anyone else you want to take with you just don't come in the house whenever you want, huh? After he digested that, I'm guessing he started checking his calendar for a free date. He may have even asked the girl I was talking to earlier to check other calendars. I don't know for sure, but the pause was long. After a while, he came back on the line, and we agreed that next Thursday would be a reasonable date for them to come to my place and sit with me. I'm sure this was to make it easier for them to scam me. I bet his idea of competitive digital would be one that favored his firm and the oil exploration company. I took a time out to distract myself. I hate long phone conversations, before calling an attorney who handled large real estate sales and the like. He was particularly knowledgeable about selling land, mineral rights, and the like. I had already charged him a retainer, and he was ready to go. In mid-June, there was a third meeting with Mr. Wingate and a host of lawyers and gophers from the law firm representing SunCloud Petroleum. Sitting next to me was my attorney and an unknown number of paralegals and legal assistants on the other end of the internet connection. I couldn't see them, but they were listening and watching through his laptop camera. With my boyfriend, they were only talking to me through headphones. I almost introduced my lawyer as Jed Clampett to the crowd Wingate had brought with him, but decided that would be overkill. Similarly, I refrained from calling the backyard pool a cement pond, but I was very, very tempted. But I refrained. Even someone as thick-skinned as Wingate could understand that. From my perspective, the meeting was going very well. Through Wingate's law firm, SunCloud Petroleum, an oil exploration company, had made increasingly favorable offers during our previous meetings and several phone calls. In the last call, they made an offer that made Carl Patterson, my attorney's real name, smile happily. Carl would have happily let them believe he was Jed Clampett, and was somewhat annoyed when I didn't go along with this charade. Oh well. Then Carl decided that the amount of money they were willing to put into my bank account was just the maximum they were hoping for. I agreed, and we made a final appointment to sign the papers. There were no last-minute obstacles to overcome, and I sensed that old Numbnuts and his men were very happy to finalize this deal. Good, I said rhetorically, pretending to study the sale papers. Patterson had already approved them, and his experience was far beyond me, so I was only honing my acting skills. You agree to let me head out here 1 or 2 days from this afternoon to finalize the sale of all the property and stuff, correct? That's right, Matt, Wingate said encouragingly, and, from his vantage point, patiently, you've got 6 months plus 1 day. Great, let's do it, I replied. I dropped the fake accent, but Wingate didn't notice it. I took a ballpoint pen offered by one of Wingate's young assistants and signed my name with a flourish wherever the girl pointed to the stack of legal documents. It took quite a while, for there were 2 sets of documents and many signatures in each. Sherry Woodward was Wingate's paralegal who was helping me. Besides being deadly cute, I was sure she was a lot smarter than her boss. Earlier, when she first entered the house, she started wandering around and looking at everything. I watched as she noted all the modern appliances, how well maintained the place was, the hardwood floors and everything else. She was also impressed with the well-maintained pool and deck behind the house. When she saw my framed business management degree on the living room wall and my MBA next to it, she tilted her head sideways. Nothing she saw matched the image of the brainless redneck I had carefully cultivated in the mind of our clueless Mr. Wingate. She moved away from the kitchen door leading to the pool and deck, wetting her lips with a very pretty pink tongue. And I was almost sure she was about to whisper a word or two of warning in Wingate's ear when Mr. Dumbass Wingate peremptorily ordered her to get something out of his briefcase in the Jeep. I didn't hear exactly what it was, but she had orders to bring it to him immediately. He did so in an overly arrogant tone and used words that I certainly would not have reacted to had he directed them at me. Upon returning, Miss Woodward whispered nothing in Wingate's ear. Sherry Woodward was now standing, warmly pressing her thigh against my left shoulder. Leaning over, she flipped through the pages and pointed to all the places where I was supposed to sign. She was even prettier up close than she was from across the room, and even longer-legged. I could see that she was delightfully slender, with mammary glands that stood out in wonderful lumps on her blouse. She smelled wonderful, too. I had no objection at all to her massaging my left side with her body. No, sir, I didn't mind one bit. When I got to the last signature on the last page of my set of papers, I looked up into her face and winked my left eye. Wingate and company couldn't see it from their seats. Sherry had to suppress a grin with a fake cough. She covered her mouth with the back of her palm to keep from giggling. Everything was ready to go. I handed her back the ballpoint pen and handed my copy of the paperwork to the lawyer. Then I began to wait. We had agreed with Wingate that as soon as the last document was signed, they would immediately wire the money to my account. Normally, they wouldn't do this, but since I was an ignorant redneck and not versed in business law and such things, they agreed. Besides, I had set up my bank so that it would receive the funds and be ready to do the transaction as soon as they were deposited. I thought Wingate was stupid and just not trustworthy. My attorney unfolded his laptop to provide me with a keyboard and screen, and I entered my password and then hit the enter key. The funds that had just been deposited by the Wingate people were instantly transferred to another account, and the original one was closed. Okay, maybe it was paranoia on my part. It probably wouldn't have occurred to them to try to get the money back just because the senior partner was a bit humiliated. But sometimes it's not paranoia. Sometimes people are really out to get you, and you never know when that exact time will come. Well, it's been a pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Wingate, I said to the man I would forever remember as Ol' Numbnuts. I extended my hand to him, standing up. For the future, Mr. Wingate, not everyone who speaks with a good old Texas colloquialism is mentally retarded or even dim-witted. In some cases, it's just a convenient manner of speech. I saw the dawn of understanding dawn in his eyes. And just so you know, I went on, I'd gladly sell you the lot for half of what you just paid me if you weren't such a pompous ass, I told him with a smile. I knew the firm he worked for would find out about this. There were too many people from that firm in the room, and I was sure not all of them were personally loyal to him. At least one I already knew about. Yes, I know it was petty and childish, but damn it felt good. They all walked out the door and headed for their big black SUVs, some of them biting their lips to keep from smirking. One of the guys could only hold back until Wingate closed the door on the back seat, then a wide grin appeared on his face. And Sherry backed up a little and stopped right in front of the door before I could whisper an invitation to dinner. She nodded and handed me a piece of paper with her phone number and the name of the hotel where they were staying. Sherry and I had a very enjoyable time that evening. I took her to the best restaurant in town, since I could definitely afford it now. After that, we went to a nightclub I knew, where there was all kinds of music, including slow dancing, which gave Miss Sherry Woodward a lot of pleasure. Back at my house, we had a long discussion about Mr. Wingate. Or rather, we did so over breakfast. We were too busy when we got back from the club. The end. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.